So we're going to be talking about graduate school in psychology. We're filming it, which is to be of benefit to people who can't be here today. Why and how-to seminar focusing largely on the why before the how-to, because without a why there's no need for a how-to. And we'll just go ahead and proceed. I have a lot of slides to cover, and I want to make sure that we got time to get to all of those. Feel free to ask questions as we go through, but if you have deep philosophical questions, perhaps you can hold on to those until after our talk, and I'll be happy to discuss things with you. Some caveats to note: this presentation admittedly involves some very rough estimates and some old statistics, but that's because I'm trying to make a particular kind of point. But I'm knowledgeable that people will massage data. That's not the case here. My goal is to make very broad points, largely valid, but which are not beyond debate. And certainly, if you have a particular agenda, you can get statistics to lean one way or another by simply massaging the way in which you analyze them or the way in which you collect it. So keep in mind that accurate and up-to-date statistics on some of the stuff we're talking about are difficult to find at times, and again, depending on one's agenda, extremely debatable. So I just ask you to kind of go with me on the grander ideas that we're going to be covering today. Why go to graduate school? Well, in short, more money, more freedom, and greater job security. So that's not a bad thing in and of itself. If you can acquire more money, who doesn't want that? If you can get more freedom, who wouldn't want that? And if you can get greater job security, especially in our economy as it is today, who wouldn't want that as well? And we have one more chair over here. So after all your time, all your effort, all your blood, sweat, and tears getting your bachelor's degree, this is what you're going to wind up with. You're going to get basically a piece of paper. It's a really fancy looking piece of paper. And when you walk across the stage, they're not even going to hand it to you. They're going to give you a proxy for this piece of paper. You'll come back and get the piece of paper yourself. So it turns out it's a very important piece of paper. I would frame it if I was you. If you get it, frame it, treat it with reverence, because you work really, really hard to earn it, and it says something about you. What it says to potential future employers is that, at very minimum, you took 120 credit hours, which meant you had at least 40 different instructors, which you could look at as supervisors, right? And if you had 40 different supervisors and they each gave you a set of criteria for how to succeed in their class, we have 2 or 3 more seats over there, people in the hall, if you'd like to come in, then you did at least 70% of that. And that's no small thing, right? You had 40 people give you 40 sets of criteria, and you were able to do at least 70% worth of credit in there, and it led you to this, which says that you have endurance, you have persistence, you have intelligence, and you have the ability to work within criteria set to accomplish goals. All things that employers want in future employees. A bachelor's degree, like I said, is an important accomplishment, but I liken it to the high school diploma of the 1940s. In the 1940s, almost nobody went past 8th grade. We were transitioning to an industrialized society. World War II propelled us there much more quickly, but we had largely an agrarian society, and most people went to 8th grade. So if you went through 12th grade, then you had 4 more years of education than most everybody else, right? And if you got that level of education, finishing 12th grade, that gave a person, usually a male, as we'll see, there's been some biases for eons, and those are being erased, but not quickly and not completely. That gave you 4 more years academic training than the average person on the street. And so that would get you an entry-level position in almost any company from which you could then move up the ladder, right? So you got in on the ground floor. You didn't start at the top. Today now, almost everybody gets 12 years of school. Either you're going to get the high school diploma or the graduate equivalency degree or diploma or certificate. Either one is fine from my point of view. I've got some good friends and family that got a GED. It doesn't really matter, but you've got to have a baseline level of education to get almost any job in America now. Not all of them, but most of them. So how do you distinguish yourself now from the average person on the street? You get 4 more years of school, which then involves getting a bachelor's degree, which is almost required these days to get a good job, depending on your definition of good job. Other avenues, as we'll see, are open to you nonetheless. But if you want to distinguish yourself then from the bachelor's level person, you got to do that with a graduate education, at least within the realm of academia. So, having this diploma for your bachelor's degree is going to allow you to apply for jobs that you otherwise wouldn't even be qualified to apply for. That'll get you in on the ground floor from which you can work your way up. However, there are other levels in organizations that you may not be able to even apply for without higher levels of education. The higher up you go, the better off you are. It turns out, at least by 2000 census data, about 1 in 4 people in Tennessee had a bachelor's degree. So we'll see how that translates into greater job security. It's a small group of people. By 2010 census, and I haven't looked at the data, it may be, or excuse me, it was 1 in 5 people. It may be up to 1 in 4. But it's not a lot of people proportionally speaking. So getting this degree, while it doesn't make you a better human being than anybody else, certainly puts you in a group of people that have distinguished themselves by accomplishing more education than the average person does. Thus, they have the ability to apply for certain kinds of jobs. Now, don't confuse, as I've alluded to, an education with human value. It will open doors, but it does not make you a good person. There are a lot of people who have no education whatsoever, incredibly intelligent people, very successful in their own right, and they're wonderful human beings. There are plenty of people with PhDs, MDs, all the Ds you care to name, who are jerks, and you wouldn't want to hang out with them to eat dinner. So it doesn't mean that you're a good person, nor does it mean you're lesser than if you don't have these kinds of accomplishments. However, these kinds of accomplishments do translate into opening doors or the lack thereof. Generally speaking, the more education you get, the more money you can make. So we look at these numbers, and these numbers here are from 2000, so they're old, but the proportions roughly hold out. High school, this is an annual income, average annual income, earnings in education, and so we say that's $26,200. Well, that's not starting salary, right? That's everybody that's got just that as a level of education, right? So you have a total group from age, 16 probably up to age 80, and on average they make $26,000 a year. 2-year degree by itself, and you're up to $33,000. 4-year degree, and you're up to $42,000. You see where this is going, right? Well, it goes beyond there. If you get the master's degree, $52,000, a doctoral degree, $70,000, and a professional degree, lawyer, medical doctor, something of that nature, $81,000 on average. So it's a pretty broad range that brings us to this average, but of course you see the trend is pretty clear. So it is advantageous. Over a lifetime, that adds up. On a yearly basis, it's pretty clear to see that, hey, that looks good. But less than high school, you're talking about a little less than $1 million in a lifetime. And these are in 2009 dollars. And I've got the, I'll try to make this PowerPoint available. I've got the citations for all these graphs and figures that I'm using. You probably won't be able to see them on video, but I did not make most of them. I found them on the internet where you could also find them. So while they may not be entirely public domain, I do cite my sources. Less than high school, you're looking at a little less than $1 million over the course of your lifetime. Get a high school diploma and bam, you're jumping up to $1.3 million. Get some college, but no degree, and you're up to 1.5. Get just that 2 years associate's degree, and you're at 1.7 versus less than $1 million. This education thing does pay off in time. Bachelor's degree, $2.2 million. Master's degree, $2.6 million. Doctoral degree, $3.2 million. Professional degree, $3.6 million over a lifetime. And you got to keep in mind that these are averages, and they vary from year to year in terms of how you look at your dollars, inflation, and things of that nature. Bachelor's degrees don't pay too badly. But in terms of field, the market will determine how much you can get paid with your bachelor's degree. So you can see that there's the broadest range and the highest attainable salary with a bachelor's degree within engineering. And this is an interesting source to Chronicle when you go to chronicle.com. And what it does is it will break out for you all the different types of engineering that then range from what appears to be $55,000 to $120,000. Now you look across here and what you will see is psychology and social work actually have the bottommost number for the bachelor's degree. Education ain't far ahead of it. So we talk a lot in our country about how we value education. But when you value something, you usually invest in it, right? And so it's interesting, we have a dichotomy between what people espouse as a value and what they actually back up with in terms of investment. We don't invest greatly in our educational system. However, if you invest yourself in the higher educational system, you can find jobs across the board that will be better for you in terms of matching your interests and paying you back over the long haul. So these are based on the 2000 numbers, thinking of a 40-year career, for example, very broadly, age, say, 25 to 65, and that doesn't take into account people who will be parents primarily, or people who come into or out of the job market, or work part-time for extended periods. But on average, a 40-year career, we're looking at, just graduate high school, you're looking at $5,000 a year extra. Get in some college and you're looking at $12,500 a year extra. That's an extra $500,000 in your lifetime. Get the 2-year degree, that's extra $15,000 a year. And get your 4-year degree, and you're looking at an extra $27,500 a year. That's a $1.1 million boost in your lifetime. And, you know, I made these slides a ways back, so I know that flat screen TVs don't cost $5,000 anymore. But you get the idea. Just substitute anything that's cool that would cost $5,000 now, and you get the general gist of where I'm going with that. Extra $12,500 a year. All right? Visuals help sometimes. Extra $15,000 a year. Not bad. Extra $27,500 a year. Maybe even better. So you can see that the higher up you go, the better off you are financially. However, most people will end up on one of these things right here. They are priceless but very expensive to maintain. So you won't be getting a new car every year. You're going to be paying out for diapers and clothes and school supplies and fees, and you know how it goes. But that's, hey, I'll take one of those over a car any day. Not anymore. I mean, I don't want another one. I like the 2 I got, and they were awesome. And they're expensive. But check it out. So the more education, not only the more money you make, but the greater the job security, as I alluded. You can see the graph over here, median weekly earnings, and that's in 2010 dollars. Go up, 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 up. This is weekly earnings. As higher up you go with your education. But unemployment decreases rather dramatically as you go up. So we talk about 9% unemployment, 10% unemployment, back down to 8% unemployment. Unemployment numbers are really hard to get a true metric of, accurate metric of. However, what you can say over the broad sweep is that people who have less than, right, a bachelor's degree account for 75% of all those unemployed. Does that mean that everybody with a bachelor's degree got a job? No. Does it mean they got the job they want? No. But it means they're more likely to have a job, and substantially more likely to have a job. And the higher up you go, when you get up into professional degrees and doctoral degrees, you see that the unemployment is actually quite low. If I wanted another job doing what I do now, they're not just growing on trees. I can't go get another professor's job working at a college because there are not that many of them, and those that exist already have people filling those positions. However, if I wanted to include the entire country in my search, I could find another job. I could also go into professional practice. I could also do research full-time. I could do consulting. I could work for another organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have flexibility at higher levels of education, which means I am more able to find a job because there are certain jobs that only people with these degrees can fill, and it turns out there's not many people, relatively speaking, with that type of education. Now, I don't expect you to follow all of this, but increases in job security for those with a college degree appear to be very stable across time. So this graph here, Stimulus Jobs 2009, which is a workforce report from Georgetown University, we have going all the way back to 1970, right? And when we're looking across here, we see that the red line is people with less than 4 years of high school. 4 or more years of high school but no college is this next line down. Some college between 1 and 3 years is the green line, and the black line is bachelor's degree and above. And that's from 1970 to 2008. And you see that those trends hold. They change. You see joblessness spikes at times when we go into recessions. I put this little little thing on myself at the bottom just to let people know who are pretty rabid one way or the other politically. I'm rabidly independent as a political stance. But Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, George W. Bush, and of course it hasn't gone into the Obama years, which obviously we are in the middle of a pretty strong recession at the time that we're talking. But it isn't about Republican and Democrat. Economies do what they do, right? You could throw policies at it all day, but it turns out that many of the forces which move the economy are beyond manipulation in terms of direct policy control. And so what you see is that having greater education gives you insurance no matter who's in charge of your Oval Office or what kind of a economy we happen to find ourselves in. And so I think that shows pretty clearly that the investment in education is well worth it on average. Why more money and greater job security? As I alluded, because more education means you have more knowledge in a smaller area, which equates to expertise, right? You know more about less, right? And if anybody wants to know about that small area in which you know lots, you're the go-to person, right? We go to people, I go to a mechanic to fix my car. That is not my area of expertise. I go to somebody with that area of expertise, and I pay them a substantial rate to give me their skills and knowledge set. And that's the way it is regardless of what kind of job we're talking about. Doesn't matter. If I go and want some kind of medical help, I'm going to another specialist. Then that's what you're doing essentially, is making yourself more and more specialized. About 1 in 5 people stay in the career, in the field in which they get their bachelor's degree. Which is to say, careers change over time. The bachelor's degree may get you in the door, but it doesn't mean that's necessarily what you're going to do for your entire life. But be mindful that you can launch careers in different directions from wherever you happen to be, especially if you got the foundation of an education, because that gives you that baseline that people go, hey, you've got a minimal amount of training and obvious levels of acquiring knowledge that we would value, and thus we're willing to hire you. The more experience you get, the better you can market yourself. I was in a bank once, and I was just standing in line, and one of the tellers was behind the counter, and a friend of hers came in, and her friend's like, hey, how you doing? She's like, not too good, loud as everybody could hear it, right? And she's like, why, what's wrong? She's like, I can't even find a job. And I'm like, ooh, that's probably not a great thing to say right in front of your management, right? And all these customers standing around. And what she probably meant, and she did say she had just graduated, is she couldn't find a job in Johnson City, in the area that she got a bachelor's degree, and she was disappointed, not realizing quite obviously that she could move up the ladder in the bank. She's already got an entry-level position, and the degree required to actually move to branch manager, regional manager, vice president, etc. And there she is shooting herself in the foot. Well, you know what? If you get a degree in a town that issues degrees in an area that's popular, it turns out it's going to be a tough job market. But if you're willing to go a little bit further afield, you can find jobs that you might want. But you might have to go further afield, as we'll see shortly. It may not be that you can graduate with a degree that everybody gets in that town and expect to go right to work in that area. But you might go to work in a related area, or you might make for yourself a career in another area with that as a baseline, or you might leave the area and find some other type of work. If you don't do some serious career planning up front, though, you're likely to wind up unsatisfied. If you're a psychology major, it's the most popular science major in the country. It's also the one with the greatest degree of dissatisfaction when people get out with their degree. And I think that's largely because people don't really do career planning. They kind of just go get the degree assuming things are going to work out, and they haven't really thought forward, what am I going to do with this degree when I'm done? I didn't. I fell into what I do kind of backwards. I was almost done with a philosophy degree when I was a senior and kind of realized that I didn't think anything about graduate education. I didn't know what it was really. And I came from I'm not a first generation college student. My dad had a master's degree. My mom had an RN. They were educated, but I didn't really know what they did because I rejected that when I was a teen. And when I finally got back into community college in my early mid-20s, and I got my degree and I did very well with my GPA, and moved over to the local university and got up to the senior level, I didn't really think about being a PhD because I didn't really know what one was. And if you'd asked me if I could be a doctor, I'd have said no. I didn't know what it took, but I certainly didn't think I had the capacity to do that. And somebody said, hey, you got a really good GPA. You could go to graduate school And I thought, well, why would I do it? More money, more freedom, you get the picture. At which point I was like, well, maybe I should be in some other area. Psychology spoke to me, but I didn't really see myself going on beyond the bachelor's degree, even when I switched that major. And if I hadn't really come up against some interesting circumstances, I could have easily been down here in the disappointed group. But I did figure this much. Having come from a construction background, at least in my early work life, I figured if I could work indoors every day, that would rock. Like air conditioning would be nice. And if I could get like a salary every week and we don't get put off when it's raining, or we don't have the condition that my neighbor has, which is that housing starts are down, so he does carpet and there's no work for the next 2 weeks, right? If we had consistent paycheck, that would be cool. And if somebody gave me benefits like, health insurance, much less something like retirement, those things would be cool. And if I could do that in an area that I thought was fulfilling, that would be well worth it. And that's kind of what you got to think about. What am I going to do with this degree? And I figured if I could work, in the low mid-20s, that'd be making more money than I was ever accustomed to making, but I could do something that I was invested in, something I felt actually spoke to who I was and it was fulfilling. And so you see that these satisfaction numbers are not great for any degree, right? And these are people, percentage of college graduates sorted by major who answered satisfied or very satisfied. And so what you see is right down here, once we get to international business, it's less than a majority that say they're satisfied or very satisfied with their bachelor's degree. So my guess is it's a pretty common theme. Just like me, people don't think forward about what they want to do with their degree. If you don't have a plan, it kind of means that you're probably going to be bothered by what you get as a condition. Job satisfaction is not the same thing as making money. You can make money in a lot of areas that you don't even need higher education for. And there's no need to get it unless you see yourself as using it in some kind of a way. If you're motivated, you can do other things. Mental health and substance abuse workers, and this is taken from job salaries and based on the Department of Labor and Workforce 2006-2007, so it's not too dated. But hey, the average is $37,900. That's across entire careers, but that ain't bad. Social science research assistant, $35,000. Social worker, $44,000. Those are jobs that require you to get a bachelor's degree at least to have them, right? You go down here, carpenter doesn't require that. I was a carpenter. You can make $39,000 a year being a carpenter. But if you don't have a calling to be a carpenter or a tradesperson, you're probably not going to be happy in that area. And I certainly didn't have a calling, and I wasn't happy doing it. I had a lot of respect for the people that were masters of their trades, but I wasn't about to become a master in any of these trades because I also then did drywall. And I hung ceiling tiles too, metal stud framing, and et cetera, et cetera. You can make $38,000 a year doing that. That's better than these. But these jobs come and go with the economy, with housing starts. They come with oftentimes low to no benefits, et cetera. Floor laying, I did that too, $39,000. Restaurant and wait staff, average of $17,000. You can do that too. Some people do that even after they got their bachelor's degree. But even then, they have the opportunity to apply for jobs while they're doing a wait staff job that they wouldn't otherwise be able to apply for. They couldn't get the job if they didn't have the degree. So you may not move straight into what you want to do, but if you're doing some career planning, you're more likely to move into the job you want to do. And you can have a fulfilling job doing clinical work, which is what I wanted to do. Helping people out is basically what clinical work is, at a bachelor's level in psychology, but it doesn't pay a lot, relatively speaking. So you have to be willing to work really hard, because it's going to be high stress, and not get paid a ton of money. But these are the most popular jobs taken from 2011-2012 pay scale, college salary report from payscale.com. Mental health technician. And so you can see the most popular means these are the people, that's where most people are. And these are the pay levels, $30,000 on average. Mental health worker, there's not a whole lot of difference. Mental health counselor, there's some difference. Mental health case manager, resident youth counselor, substance abuse counselor, clinical research assistant, case manager for social services, clinical research coordinator, child, family, or school social worker. They may not pay a ton of money, but some of them pay pretty well, and most of them are pretty fulfilling jobs. So that's the freedom part. By getting the higher education, you get the freedom to do things you like. And as they like to say, or at least as I like to say, if you love what you do for a living, you never work a day in your life. You get to do your job. You don't have to do your job, and that's a blessing. There are exciting areas in psychology other than clinical, but clinical is the dominant subfield. 37% of working psychologists are clinical. Counseling and developmental psychology, the next major areas of employment. But as we'll see, there are a lot of other areas. But these areas up here take higher levels of education to get into, for you to even specialize in those kinds of jobs. So what kinds of things do we do? Well, behavioral neuroscience, child psych, cognitive, community, cross-cultural, developmental, environmental, experimental, forensic, health, industrial, organizational, personality, psych of women, school, education, social psychology, sports psychology, quantitative psychology. If there's people doing it, there's probably a psychology of it, which is one of the beautiful things about psychology. If you're willing to go to the next level of training, you can probably find a job that you find fascinating, because you can tailor it to what you're already interested in. And you can do work in research, which would be grant and report writing, marketing research, product research analyst, research assistant, statistical assistant, because as a psychology major, you're going to have some background in statistics, right? And research methods, which most people don't get as a part of their general bachelor's training. And there are areas outside of psychology in which a bachelor's degree in psychology would be relevant. So you could do career planning outside psychology. So it's all about how you market yourself in your degree. The person who was a bank teller could have marketed herself as being very good with management capabilities. Obviously, she didn't have a lot of people skills in that particular instance, but if she had thought about it more deeply, she could have actually said, hey, I've got a background, not that she was psychology, but let's say she was. I got a background in psychology, and actually that tailors me to be really good at management, because I understand people and I understand organizations and I understand research and finding out how to implement interventions systematically in order to improve both employee morale and customer satisfaction. What business don't want that, right? So you could be admissions recruiting, advertising, marketing, banking, computer industry, human resources, insurance agent, journalism, management, nonprofit organizations, public relations, retail supervisor, sales representative, or an entrepreneur. Because what they say is 9 out of 10 small businesses fail, but it isn't because they don't love what they do. It isn't because they don't have a passion. It isn't because they don't have a great idea. It's probably because they don't know how to run a business all that well. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of stuff to understand to successfully run a business. Having a higher education, you would at least appreciate that you could become educated in all the variables that you would need to have knowledge in order to run a successful business, and you could make a business of your own. You don't even need a bachelor's degree to do it. But it could also set you up to go down further higher education, down other career paths like being a dentist or going into education at any level from preschool to higher education. There are early childhood development psychologists, right? That they understand how children develop better than anybody else. It's what they do. They have a lot of knowledge in a small area. Lawyer, medical doctor, any specialty, nurse, nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, physical occupational therapist, pharmacy, political science, public health, on and on and on. You just got to make sure you have the prereqs to get in there and that you do the required entrance exams. For us, to get into psychology, we're talking about the GRE. For medical, it's MCAT. For lawyers, it's the LSAT. So you start envisioning a career for yourself. Psychology turns out to be a great underpinning in terms of major, but you got to think forward as to what are you going to need to do to prop yourself up. So those with a bachelor's degree in psychology are employed in the public and private sectors. And so there's a lot of opportunities. As we'll see, there's growth in our field. But I made a meme. One does not simply get a bachelor's degree and have unlimited freedom and make unlimited cash. You're just not going to walk out the door and have an employer go, ooh, you went to college? What did you find out? Right? They're going to say, great. You have the qualifications to apply for the job, come in for a personal interview. If we hire you, here's the policies and procedure manual. Learn it, do it. And you'll have to distinguish yourself by your performance. So it turns out that psychology per se, which is the area we're entering into, pays better with a graduate degree. Lecturers, instructors, 40,000. You can see this is what we do: assistant professors, associate professors, full professors, research positions, independent clinicians, VA hospital clinicians, independent practitioners, applied psychology, and IO makes the biggest money. So industrial organizational psychology, turns out there's a whole organization dedicated to that. It's called the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology, called PSYOP. You go, what is that? Find out. We'll talk about doing your homework in a minute, because there's some opportunities the higher up you go. And we're growing. So we look at, hey, we're going to grow for at least the next decade. This is what they said last decade, right? So as we see, it hasn't stopped growing. We're looking for growth for at least another 10 years in our field. And this is a quote from actually the Department of Labor's statistics, the Occupational Outlook Handbook, being quoted, I believe, by APA. Yes, APA Careers. You can find a lot of this information on APA's website, American Psychological Association. Job prospects should be best for people who have a doctoral degree from a leading university in a field such as clinical counseling or health, and those with specialist or doctoral degrees in psychology. Employment will grow because of increased demand for psychological services in schools, hospitals, social service agencies, mental health centers, substance abuse treatment clinics, consulting firms, private companies, and the United States military. Because we got people coming over from some terrible situations, and psychology has a specialty that can be helpful to those people. So the push to get the public in tune with psychology isn't as great as I'd like. Y'all are the forefront of the people who understand what psychology can do. The layperson doesn't generally understand what psychology can provide as a service to the greater community or the greater society itself. So core participants in healthcare practices will provide opportunities. Psychologists are needed to work with an aging population that is diversifying rapidly. So diversity is something we specialize in, and that includes diversity of age. Oh, I'm doing good, because there goes the bells. So that's halfway through. And we welcome all comers, and that's nice, because I'm going to just pull all these up so I don't have to keep walking back and forth here. Besides being the right thing to do, why is that important that psychology welcomes all comers? Well, it's a global thing. As y'all are probably well aware, being at least in college, diversity is ever increasingly part of all workforces. But America as an economy is becoming increasingly participant in broader and broader markets, which include many, many, many cultures. And facility in understanding culture is something that psychology brings to the table. Fluid diversity offers advantages to organizations because differing perspectives enhance creativity and understanding of existing or potential markets and products. So a diverse perspective helps companies adapt to ever-changing circumstances, unless they don't know what they're doing, which is far more often the case than it should be. Because smooth integration doesn't happen haphazardly. It's been shown that a lack of appreciation and understanding of diversity in organization leads to conflict, declining cooperation, and inhibition of performance. However, that doesn't have to be the case, because many research-supported approaches reduce bias and foster good group relationships, employee commitment, and improved productivity. And guess who brings those research-based interventions to the table? Psychology. That's largely where this comes from. It's then applied by other people in business and management. So the overall move toward understanding and embracing diversity is relatively recent, unfortunately, and it ain't even near completely fair yet, because we can look at numbers from 1963 up to 2008, and right off the bat you can see that female earnings in red have always remained roughly parallel, subordinate to male earnings in blue. That's a pretty big gap, and it's pretty consistent. Is it closing? Yeah. Is it closing rapidly? No. So let's not be silly about that. After taking into account things like taking off time for childbirth or being a parent who has to also balance child care with work responsibilities, when you take all the things into account, there are still some very serious discrepancies in pay across all kinds of groups. So we look at total, men in blue and red is women, and we got 798, and this is weekly earnings, pay gap, 798 versus 638 for men and women overall. In the white group, it's this. In black or African American, it's a little less dramatic, but still significantly present. Asian, pretty big drop, and Hispanic and Latino cultures, also the same. So you can see that women across cultures don't get paid as well as men. Is that fair? Hell no. It ain't even close to fair. But it takes an educated populace to understand the trends to actually lobby for changes that would have to happen at high levels in both policy making for the country or the state, but also in organizations that actually do the paying and the compensating. And so people who are educated are better prepared to make this go away, as it should. And so psychology, nicely, is on the forefront of this. As it turns out, you can see some pretty dramatic increases, with 1971 being in blue and 2002 being in red, that working women with PhDs went from 20% up to 47.9%. So working PhD graduates was 80% male in 71, and now it's only 52.1% male in 2002. It's changed since then, believe me. It's much different now. Women undergraduates, went from 46% in 71 to 77.5%. That's why there's so many women in this class today. Turns out men are being edged out of higher education, which is to their disadvantage. And that gets into broader societal issues about how we educate people, how we prepare them to see their future, and how we set them up to see themselves as potentials for success or failure in the realms of academia. But clearly it's changing, but it hasn't changed completely, because we still have people who have their jobs. So we had white students made up 88% of all undergraduates in 76, and that number had dropped to 75% by 2002, and we've been 10 years since then. So the numbers keep changing because women and minorities are valued in psychology. Getting into graduate school in psychology is not easy, but it is way easier if you plan ahead, and I did not. I did everything kind of backwards. My hard work paid off in the end, but if you plan ahead, you can pretty much set yourself up for success. I got a three-part formula. That's my formula, but I think most people would agree with it. GPA, what about it? Do as well as you can do. Not everybody comes into school with a vision for themselves, and they don't always do well in their first year. Many people don't do well in their first year, and it's because they've been told over and over, go to school, go to school, to go to school, and they hear it in their head, but they don't have it in their heart. And I would say people should walk away from school if they find that's the situation. If they're failing their classes or getting D's regularly, then probably they don't have the true motivation to be there, which is okay. It's probably even normal. Just walk away from it. Go get some life experience until you can't stand it out there no more. All right? Wait tables and pay the rent and all the bills, and then come back when you're ready. We're still going to be here. It'll cost a little more because tuition rises faster than inflation. But it'll be here, but you'll be prepared for it when you want it for yourself and not because you just heard that's the thing you're supposed to do. So when you do come back, if you got D's and F's, replace them with A's. Go back and take those classes again. But don't take them again unless you're going to do better. All right? You should have already had this talk with yourself about whether you're really ready to do this. And if you're really ready to do it, going back to classes that you didn't like the first time, taking them again and doing well in them can replace grades. Now you got to make sure it's within the institution and that you have the numbers lined up and all of that stuff, but that's the thing to do if you can do it. And then look at later and specific performance. When you're pitching yourself to a graduate school, your last 60 hours is oftentimes a much better performance than your first 60 hours, which you're free to highlight. Right? Which shows what? Maturity and development of vision for one's career, right? I finally got why I'm here. It clicked. Now I'm putting myself all in, and I got evidence to show the change. And it's in my GPA, which has increased in the last 60 hours. Also, within your major, do you do really well in the psych classes that you're taking versus the other classes? Because that's another way to highlight your abilities. Then you got the GRE, Graduate Record Exam, which is intimidating. It intimidated me. I didn't really know what it was. I studied really, really, really hard for the psychology subject test. And I thought, well, naively, if I'm going into graduate school in psychology, the people who are admitting me should probably care a lot about how much I know about psychology. So I put tons of time into studying, and I got 80th percentile. I did really well. Turns out nobody cared. Right? If I'd spent all that time studying the general test, right, I would have done better on it. I didn't do terrible. I made about 50th percentile on the general test. But I spent tons of time studying something that most people didn't care about. In fact, some people couldn't even look at it because if it wasn't required, then how can they compare you? And almost no schools require that anymore. So take your time, study hard. Kaplan and other agencies will be glad to take your money and show you how to do this. I don't think that they're going to show you anything that you can't read for yourself. However, if you pay somebody $1,000, what do we know about cognitive dissonance? You're probably going to be really motivated to go to their seminars, pay attention to what they say, and do the practice that they tell you to do. If that's what you need, then you should do that. If you have the ability to do it, why not? If you don't have the ability to do it, I'll show you. You can get a lot of this stuff on the web. Take it no later than the fall prior to your expected admission. You're going to start applying for programs next fall, this fall. So almost all of the deadlines have passed because we're in spring of 2012. So if you think you want to go to graduate school in the fall of 2012, for psychology, most of those deadlines have passed. Not all of them, but you need to check into the programs you think you want to apply to and see when the deadlines for applications are. Typically, you want to be well prepared by fall of 2012, which means having taken your GRE, to start applying to be admitted in fall of 2013. So that's what you want to be able to do, is figure out when your programs are and make sure your GREs are done, preferably way before then, because you might want to take it over. And I have another slide that I don't have with me that shows quite clearly that this is not an IQ test. This is a gameable test. And the slide that I wish I put on there but didn't think to do it shows that one person's score going up from, I think it was 900 something to 10 something, and now they're on a different scale altogether, but they went up substantially from one administration to the next administration in a 5-month span, and then came back 2 months later and went into the 1200s. So they went from the 900 to the 1200s in 7 months, not by magically becoming smarter, right? But by working really, really, really hard on what they're going to test you on. And if you work really hard on that, it should alleviate any anxiety. I say study it like you're going to die if you don't do well on this test, to motivate yourself to do the studying. Because if you're intimidated by it, you're going to put it off, and you're going to put it off, and you're not really commit to it, and then you're going to go in and freak out. But if you put all your time on the front end, then you should be able to walk in and take all the pressure off by going, you know what? Do your test anxiety reduction methods, which is a whole nother video, right? But then relax, because you can take this thing as many times as you want to. It costs money to take it, but take the pressure off. You could do it as a dry run, but if you want to take it again, you can take it again. Yes?
About how much money does it cost?
I don't recall. Anybody taking it recently? It's like $200. $160. But keep in mind always, it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. However, if you make an extra $2.5 million in your lifetime because you spent $160 twice, that's a good investment, right? So you got to keep it in perspective. It's easy to go, gosh, it costs so much to go to school. It does. But look what you get in the end. And then the third thing is research, volunteer, leadership, experience, references, everything else. These are the number one and number two thing they're going to look at when evaluating your application. If they don't know you from anybody, they're not going to bother reading tons of your reference letters and your statements of purpose and letters of intent and all that stuff if your GPA is below their cutoff or if your GRE is below their cutoff. You got to stay above the cutoff in order to be considered. Once you're in the pool to be considered, then all of this other stuff is going to matter, because that's going to distinguish you. Because it turns out that everybody's in the pool has a good GPA, right? That's how they got in the pool. Everybody's in the pool has got a good GRE. That's how they got in the pool. Now how are you going to distinguish yourself? You better look at all of these other variables, and in fact, that's what we're going to do. Look at all of these other variables. So, join and be active in organizations. Our department's got Psychology, International Honor Society in Psychology. It's got a GPA requirement, but as soon as you reach it, join it. It goes on to your VITA, which we'll talk about. The VITA is actually another talk that we're going to do later in the semester. I forget when it is. I don't know if anybody out here knows it, but if you can look it up and tell me, I'll put it on the board. But in any event, you can change your GPA, get it up, and then join this honor society, which I'll talk a little more about in a minute. Psychology Club, however, is open to everybody. Anybody who's just got an interest in Psychology Club, you can just join it. Well, that's a good thing to do. Join it and become active in it. Most people join these things and they never show up again. They join it, they put it on their VITA, which is a fancy word for an extended resume, and they're done. And not judging, I did the same thing. Later I found out I should have been active. And I was busy. Everybody's busy. I get that. I had a wife and 2 kids and working 20 to 30 hours a week and taking literally between 15 and 22 semester hours every semester, including summers. I'm busy. But it turns out that this is a really big deal. And I didn't recognize it at the time. There are other professional groups that have student memberships. APA, APS, Association for Psychological Sciences, Association for Behavior Analysis, Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, etc., etc., etc. If you start envisioning for yourself a career, find the organization that fits your career and become a student member of it. They have all kinds of publications that they'd be happy to send you, tons of stuff on the web. If you qualify for honors groups, join them. The money you spend buys you a designation on your vita showing you value achievement. I thought that was a big crock, and I was in undergraduate, and I'm sitting there in my community college where I was the manager of the Pease Auditorium at Central Piedmont Community College, and I was running the lights and sound for this 2-year honor society, and all these people were coming in with their processions, and they were getting all their accolades and awards, and I'm thinking to myself, what bullshit. God, how pompous. Now, who's full of it? Turns out it was me. I'm like, I'm smart. I got good grades. I don't need to pay anybody to tell me I'm smart, right? And when I got into my senior year, somebody's like, oh, God, dude, those go on your vita. They distinguish you in a lot of ways because those memberships are actually meaningful to the people who evaluate you. And I'm like, oh! And I joined 4 immediately. I was always qualified for them. I was Golden Key, Psi Chi, Phi Sigma Tau, and one more. I don't stay active in them, obviously, but it was a step towards something. And I didn't recognize until later when I joined the Governmental Association of Graduate Students at Appalachian State University, and they did the same thing again at Virginia Tech, that these groups actually provide you lots of experience, lots of opportunity to grasp some pretty important principles. And as I'll say with the Psi Chi thing, it was interesting because when I came to interview here, Otto Zinzer was a faculty member, and he was the faculty advisor of Psi Chi, which I am now. I took it over from him. And he and I were sitting in his office, and I had noticed on the website, because I did my homework before I came to my interview, that he was the faculty advisor. I said, hey, I noticed you're a faculty advisor of Psi Chi. He's like, that's right. I said, I'm a member of Psi Chi. He goes, I know. You know? He actually read my vita. And that meant something to him. And I didn't realize at the undergraduate level what that meant. So there I was denigrating something I had no knowledge of, which is typically what humans do. If you don't know about something, put it down. If you want to do clinical work, find opportunities in the community to volunteer helping people. Big brother, big sister, tutoring people how to read, whatever it is, because you're going to get experience to talk about in your application and possible interview, and you're going to get opportunities to meet people who might potentially be recommenders down the road, and you're going to be showing to your future faculty that you have a dedication to helping other people. That's if you want to go the clinical route. If you don't, then you might want to pick some different kinds of things. Volunteering will never do you wrong. Volunteering is good, period, whether you go on in school or not. If you're in a sorority or fraternity or any other student group, become a leader. How do you do that? Show up. Who runs the world? The people who show up. If you go to the meetings, you're going to oftentimes find there's like 3 people there. And oftentimes there's 4 officers. So guess who they're going to be when they vote? It's going to be you. So show up, become treasurer, become secretary, become a chair of a committee, become a president or a vice president. Take the opportunity to take that leadership role. Those things are important. It shows you how to run meetings. I didn't know what Robert's Rules of Order are. How many people here really know what that is? Robert's Rules of Order. Exactly. Turns out it's the way you run a meeting. If you don't want chaos and you want to have any of your decisions be binding. It's a great thing to know, and I learned that by being a student, a graduate student representative to the Graduate Student Senate. And that's the kind of stuff you learn, how to work with other people, how to accomplish goals as a group, and again, you might meet people who can recommend you down the road. Do your lab work. If you're going for a PhD program versus like an Ed.D. or a Sci.D. or a Master's, research will be more valuable than volunteer experience, but volunteering and leadership is always good. It's always something you can highlight. No no worries there. But if you think you want to go into clinical, and we'll talk more about that, then you want to get involved in research, and you can go on our website and find out all of our faculty and what they're into and what their research labs are doing now. And you can make an appeal to each one of them. Don't do a shotgun approach and email all of them and go, I want to work with somebody. You better have done some homework and show that you think that you match, at least in some tangential way, the interests of the faculty members doing the research, because they want people who are qualified to help them do that research. It gives you valuable experience. And then you want to talk to them about the opportunities, because that might be something that you're going to do down the road. And if you get an opportunity to work with them, do an incredible job. Do not come half-assed to research labs. Right? If you go in saying, I want to be your research assistant, you are going above and beyond, which is one of the things that people clearly see on your veto when you put it there. Go above and beyond so that the people can then make great statements about you in letters of recommendation, saying that's a go-to person. They take total responsibility. They take appropriate initiative. They're very responsive to feedback, things that are very important. We'll see about that in just a minute. If you don't know what the difference is between a PhD, an EdD, a PsyD, a master's degree, etc., that's normal. Neither did I at the time. But it's incumbent upon you to find out. Get on the internet. Go find out whether you need a master's degree to go to a doctoral program, or whether a master's degree will suffice to get you where you want to go professionally. It's not all that hard to do. Just do your homework. But you got to be thinking down the road, what kind of career do I want? If you're not thinking, you won't do it. And then, are there places to do the homework? Absolutely. You can find all about programs in this little book right here, Graduate Study in Psychology. Find out which programs you want to apply to, and then have good reasons for picking them, because you're going to include that in your statement of purpose. You're going to have to pitch yourself to a graduate program. They don't just take random people. They want people who want to come to their program because they know what kind of career they want, and they see how that program fits into the pathway to achieve that career. There are lots of resources. Our department's got a set of links called links on our department website. Click on it. APA has got more than you can shake sticks at. You go on Amazon.com and you can find Graduate Study in Psychology. You can find last year's version, because it turns out there are not tons of new programs every year, and tons of programs don't go out of existence every year. So if you get last year's version, I think I saw a copy for $1.83 on Amazon.com. This year's version, 2012, is like 18 or 19 bucks. But it's got all the information you could ever need to know about every kind of program that's a graduate program in psychology. It's a totally worthwhile investment. Get that book and sit down with it for a long time and figure out what kinds of things you're interested in. Turns out all the GRE prep materials you could ever want or need are also on Amazon.com. All these online retailers have used copies for relatively cheap. You can go down to Mr. K's used bookstore and find this. You can go down to Barnes & Nobles and find new copies. Go get resources and immerse yourself in these resources. So Google stuff. You know, I don't know what a PsyD is. Google PsyD. What is PsyD? Guess what? There'll probably be a wiki page on it, and it'll tell you exactly what a PsyD is. And so you will now know what one is. And you go, oh, I didn't know that. Well, neither did I back in the day. You have to learn these things, and then talk to faculty and others in the field about which kind of programs they were into and what they think. Then contact faculties in programs to which you want to apply. This is something people just don't know to do. When you apply to a program, they want to see that you know what their faculty do, especially if it's a research program, because if I research a particular field, I don't want you to come in and going, oh, I don't want to research that. I want people who want to do what I do, right? That's who I'm going to have in my laboratory. If you would have taken the time to email me, or taken the time to check me out on the web, look on PsycInfo, see what my most recent publications were. I'm not saying you should for me, because you probably won't be interested in my area of research. But that's the thing, is like maybe there's 10 faculty at a program. They're not all doing something you want to do. Find out which ones do something you want to do. Find 2 or 3 of them. Look them up, see what they've been doing lately, because their websites may not have been updated. And then email them with an inquiry going, I'd like to apply to your program next fall, for admission for next fall. I'm anticipating graduation, and you can talk about your GPA and your qualifications, but I'm wondering if you're taking students. Because they're going to tell you whether or not you are a good fit. If they look at your vita or your resume, or you have some kind of conversation with them, they might be going on sabbatical next year. And you may not even know what that is. I didn't. It means they're taking a time off of official duties, which means they're not taking on students, to write a book or take a trip or collect data or do something else. And so that means they're not taking a student this year. So if you write saying, I really want to work with so-and-so, and they go, oh, well, I'm not going to be here next year, that's not going to look that good. If you emailed them, you'll go, well, I realize so-and-so is taking a sabbatical next year, but I'm hoping to gain admission anyway because I would like to work with them when they come back. All right? You might find somebody's retired. You might find that they don't have funds for a GA or things of that nature, et cetera, et cetera. Demonstrate commitment and be realistic. The more programs you apply to, the better your chances are of getting in, up to a point, around 15 or 20 programs. It's an asymptotic thing. If you don't qualify to get into 20 programs, a 21st application is probably not going to be your magic ticket, right? But I applied to 3, and I had no clue what I was doing. One of them was Duke, and I misspelled a word in my statement of purpose that was pretty silly upon reflection. But I also had 1140 GREs, 50 percentile. It wasn't something to be ashamed of, but they don't look at people with 1140 GREs at Duke. I wasted $50 because I didn't look it up in the big book, because guess what's in the big book? It tells you what the average GREs are to people who get in, the average are people who apply and all that kind of stuff. And then I applied to 2 other places, one of which was where I got my degree. I didn't recognize that people are not usually taken into the institution that gives them their bachelor's degree. They like to go further afield. They like to push you to go further afield. And I just didn't get in. I didn't have any kind of strategy whatsoever, so I had to take a job working $8 an hour with my associates, my Bachelor of Arts, and my Bachelor of Science. But the $8 an hour was working in mental health, and I worked with master's level therapists, and they taught me what I'm showing you now, which is to create a strategy to apply to graduate schools. And then I got in the next year, because I had the GPA and I had a decent GRE. Many people don't want to leave their home area to get further education. I sure didn't. Born and bred, probably be dead is what I thought about where I came from, right? But it turns out I didn't get in. So guess what? You want a higher education? Go. Get up and go. It's not something that's easy to do. I had to move my daughter, who was in junior high the first time and was in high school the second time. You want to move a daughter in high school? No, you don't. But I did. And I had to tell her, honey, I love you, but this is the time. The iron is hot. We got to strike. I got to go to the next level to get my doctoral degree. We're leaving. I'm sorry. But this is going to benefit all of us if I get a higher level of education. And ultimately, the man she married was in the next town. So she never would have met him if we didn't go. So oftentimes things we think we could never do turn out to be wonderful things in retrospect. But you got to take the risk and go. Well, it turns out getting into programs, clinical psychology master's programs, these are acceptance rates. And this is from Eye on Psychi, which is a publication put out by Psychi. If you can join it, you get this, and this is a beautiful thing. Master's level is what I did. I went and got my master's at Appalachian State University, and I got a 4.0. So then I got a good GPA undergrad, I got a good GPA at graduate school, and I still got my solid GRE score. Plus I got lots of research experience, and I made some connections in my program, and that helped me get connected to people at Virginia Tech. I applied to a broad array of schools when I got my master's, and then I got in. But you can see that these numbers varied widely, and you're more likely to get in the master's level than you are at the doctorate level. So you wonder, well, is that a good strategy? Should I get my master's first and then go on to the doctoral level? Or should I try to get into a doctoral program first, which means you're going to get your master's degree. You don't bypass it. It just means when they admit you, they assume you're going to get your master's degree and stay and complete the doctorate, right? And that's quite the investment in you. And so master's level clinicals, 37%, cognitive 40%, community 61%, counseling 63%, educational 57%, developmental 44%. You see that those numbers are pretty big. Quantitative psych, 78%. Why? Very few people are applying. Y'all love stats? If you do love stats, you can go to grad school because they want you. There are not that many spots, but there's not that many people applying, and that gets into a competition issue. When you go to the doctoral level, you'll see that the competition for clinical becomes super stiff. So that if you want to get a freestanding PsyD, again, look them up, that's a much more practice-oriented degree. It's much less research emphasis on it. About 50% of people get into it, but you're going to pay through the nose to go. You're going to pay a premium. It's a professional school. You're going to walk away, if you don't have lots of money to begin with a lot of debt. They're not going to give you tuition waivers or anything like that. You're going to pay them to go. So about 50% of people who apply, which are people who are typically qualified, get in. But you go to a university-based PsyD program, it goes down to 35. You go to a practice-oriented PhD program, it's 16%. Equal emphasis practice and research, 14, and research-oriented PhD at 7%. Can you get here? Absolutely. You have to look at that now, though. You have to set yourself up for that now. And you can see that the research-oriented PhD provides the most financial support. 89% of them provide a tuition waiver. They pay your tuition. And some kind of assistantship, meaning they pay you money to do a job in the department, which means you apprentice for money. It ain't a ton of money. You ain't going to get rich, right? But you're not going to have nearly as much debt if you can get in here versus here. But both will take you to a doctorate, and both doctorates pay. Don't get me wrong. It's just different orientations. And I recognize it's 5, so I'll be quick. Transcripts. Request them to be mailed to your graduate programs. Give names, addresses, and fees to your registrar office way ahead of time. Give them time to do their job, because without a transcript, they're not even going to process your application. Letters of intent and statements of purpose. There's several things to be aware of. Do spell check and grammar check. I said I longed to become more acquainted with this field of psychology when I wrote to Duke, and I did a spell check and I accepted all the changes it suggested. And when that one was being suggested a change and I just accepted it without scrutinizing it, it said eventually I love to become more antiquated with this area of psychology, which is wrong and not what you want to write to a graduate program, right? So grammar check yourself. Don't just accept changes. Read it, reread it. Have some of your people read it. Give you notes on it, right? See if it makes sense. Highlight your fit and your accomplishments from doing your homework. How do you fit this program? Don't be too revealing about personal issues. That was something else I did in my first round. When I was a young man, I was rather aggressive. And then I had become a pacifist as a person in my early mid-20s. And I thought, well, gosh, if aggression is a trait and I have chosen to be a pacifist and I'm committed to it and I can actually demonstrate that it's a solid commitment, how does one choose not to have a trait? So I'm very interested in researching that. Wrong, 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 wrong. Didn't get in, and I went and talked to one of my mentors at the program where I was named Outstanding Senior of the Year, wondering why they didn't take me. And he's like, yeah, you said you wrote this thing about being aggressive. I said, yeah, younger. I grew up with like 5 brothers, you know, all this other stuff. He's like, yeah, I know. I pitched for you. But about 8 years ago, we had this graduate student. He didn't get the grade he wanted, and he threatened one of the faculty members here. And I'm like, but psychologists should be above biases, right? No, they're human beings. Just because a doctor knows about viruses doesn't mean they don't get infected by viruses. Just because psychologists know about biases do not mean they are not affected by biases. And that's what happened. So the next time around, I wrote, aggression is a terrible problem in our society, and I would love to do research and clinical work to help ameliorate the problem. Much better, much better. Once you get in, then you can reveal about yourself, but don't reveal big glaring things that somebody might go, do you not have any boundaries? Do you not realize that we don't know you? And that's not usually what people say upon not meeting somebody, right? So do explain problems with GPA. Highlight that you went back and replaced D's and F's because you see a vision for yourself now for how you want to go on to the next level. Letters of recommendation and letters of reference, they oftentimes come with forms. Get permission from professors or individuals who you'd like to write you a letter of recommendation. Ask them something like, would you be comfortable writing me a positive letter of recommendation? And if they go, sure, then go thank you and don't go back. Right? If they go, yeah, no problem at all, that's who you want to write your letter of recommendation. That's going to be based on what you've done to that point. Doctors are preferred, but only because they've been there and done that. It's not because they're better people, but they've been through graduate school who are better qualified to comment on whether you have what it takes to go through graduate school than somebody who's been through graduate school. So if you can get them, get them. But people are like, well, gosh, I worked at Walmart for 5 years. Is that relevant? Well, of course it's relevant. You worked the same job for 5 years? Do you have a supervisor who glows about you? Absolutely. Well, get them to write you a letter of reference. There's nothing wrong with that, but the idea is to match where you're going with who's writing your letter of recommendation. So this is from the ETSU recommendation form. Recommenders have to evaluate you. How will they know you? What will they say about you? Are you comfortable not knowing what they're going to say about you because they're going to ask you to sign a statement that says you can't look at this ever? Because if they know you can look at it, and they know that your letter writer knows you can look at it, what's the letter writer going to do? Are they going to be as honest knowing that you're going to scrutinize them later? No, the idea is that they're going to promote more honesty. You have the right not to sign this. Sign it. Implicit. It's not a command. It's a strong suggestion. It says, I'm confident that I don't need to see what my letter writers are going to say about me. I trust that it's going to be good. And I'm not litigious. Nobody wants to admit litigious people who will sue them. Right? So how will they know you? What will they say? They're going to say, who are you comparing this? How long and what capacity have you known these people? I get people all the time go, hey, can you write me a letter of reference? And I'm like, I don't know who you are. I have 320 people in my big class every semester. I got like 50 people in a smaller class. I got graduate students. I got like 1,000 people I interact with every year. If I don't know you, what can I say about you? You go like, well, I was in your class. I got an A. I'm like, that's on your transcript. You already got an A on your transcript in my class. I could say that you did really well, and that would be a true statement. But what else could I add if I don't know you well enough? And so your Vita, sometimes people who work in my lab, I don't know them intensely well personally, but I've got all kinds of people who work in the lab that can vouch for their responsibility, their initiative, their abilities, their willingness to work with other people. I got a Vita that shows all the projects they worked on in my lab. Now I got something to work from. I can say, hey, this person has worked on X number of projects. They've done this kind of thing. They've done that kind of thing. All true. And then they're going to ask you as a recommender, ability to master academic work. Well, that's going to be on your transcript. But are you in the top 10%, top 25%, average, below average? Written expression or ability to write? Ability to communicate orally? Familiarity with research techniques? Ability to work independently? Ability to work with others? Motivation, persistence, reliability, dependability? How do I know that if I haven't interacted with you? I'd have to put NA on a lot of that stuff. I could look at the email you wrote me to ask if I would do this and go, well, it looks like it's well written. Good. But then I'm not going to have much else to say, and you don't want that. You want somebody that knows you well, because then they're going to check one of these boxes. Recommend admission strongly. Recommend admission. Recommend admission with some reservations. I'm not recommending them. You don't want any of these latter three, right? This one's okay. If a person's being honest, they might say, hey, from what I know, I recommend them. But I don't know them so well that I recommend them strongly. But the latter two, you definitely don't want. And then they're going to ask you to write a letter to support it. And then I got to sign it and date it and attest to that being what I believe is my honest evaluation of a person. So keep that in mind. And then recommenders got to send in lots of information on lots of people. Make it easy for them. Organize it. I think I wrote over 100 letters this season. That means 100 different forms, 100 different envelopes. A lot of them are online now, but I got to click individual boxes and all these things. When you go to get these letters from people, make a list of schools, whether forms are required, and their deadlines. Clip each of the forms to a self-addressed stamped envelope that bears the program's name. Have it addressed either to the program or to you, depending on what the program requires, because as it turns out, we can make a mess of that. Put the forms into envelopes and lists into a larger folder along with a copy of your personal statement, or just the general part is just fine. Sometimes you should write the last, have a general statement and make the last paragraph, customize it for each school you're applying to so they see that you have a general purpose for being higher educated, and then this is why you want to come here. And put your Vita and resume in there. If it's just a pile of forms and a pile of envelopes, don't be surprised if the wrong form winds up with the wrong envelope, where somebody at University of Georgia is going, well, this guy says this person would be perfect for the University of Florida. I guess we'll let them go there, because they do that. They care. If you can't keep your letter writer straight, right, how are you going to come and master their program, right? If I screwed up, it might be my fault. In fact, it is my fault. But don't let our fault be your problem, right? Because it's too late at that point. Give this packet to your recommender at least 2 weeks before the first deadline. And if you're going to do other programs that you find later, try to assemble them all and put them into a packet by themselves. Don't hand out a single letter every time you find a program to apply, because I don't sit down and do it every time somebody does something like that. I make a stack of them. I got a sticky note that says when the first deadline is, and then I sit down, and it takes hours and hours and hours to do all of this stuff. Anything you could do to make that job easier for me is greatly appreciated, and it benefits you because I'm less likely to screw it up. If you may be offered an in-person interview. If you are, go and be on your best professional behavior at all times. Be prepared to incur travel costs. Inquire about local lodging. That may mean you get to stay with a local grad student. So we got grad students, we'll let prospective grad students come in and stay with them. But keep in mind, they get to say something about whether you come or not. So pick up your socks when you stay at their house, right? Be a gentle person at all times, because everybody in this program is deciding whether or not they want to spend the next 4 years with you, right? And they're going to make that on all available information. So from all your contacts, all your email, all your interactions with staff, all your interactions with students, all your interactions with faculty, these are professional interactions. Be professional. Be understanding of timing of interviews and how that may conflict with other interviews. You may get more than one interview offer. Realize you're screening the program as much as they're screening you. You're going to spend 2 to 4 years there. You better like it. You better go and check out the place and see if you could stand to live in Saskatchewan, right? Or if you could stand the heat of Boca Raton, right? You got to figure out what you want and whether it's geographically and professionally suited to your needs. Make sure that the person you think you're going to work with isn't a giant asshole, because you're going to have to spend a lot of time with them for a long time. Go having done your homework on the program, on the university, on the faculty, on the town. Go prepared not to ask questions, and then ask some questions. Ask good questions that you thought about before, and ask of the faculty, the staff, the student. It's okay to ask different people the same question, because guess what? You may get different answers, right? And that's important information. So you want to see what converges and what diverges in terms of your understanding. And if you can't go, request a phone interview, so you can at least talk to the people who are making a decision about whether or not you get in. If you get an offer, tell them whether you're waiting on other interviews. If you are, find out what the deadline is for acceptance. Inquire about conditions of the offer, whether they're negotiable. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't, but be very deferential and respectful when you do that. Don't go, well, can I get more money? Just say, well, I was wondering what other kinds of assistantships and fellowships might be available, right? Because it might be that you get a full package over here and only a half package over here, but this isn't necessarily the place you want to go, and you weigh your ideal situation versus your financial situation, and then you have to pick a program. So once you pick a program, go and give it your all. Realize most people got an inferiority complex, and they're just waiting to be found out that they're a fraud, that they're not the genius their family keeps saying they are, right? Are you going to graduate school? You must be smart. Enough desire, effort, and persistence, so you can do pretty much anything, right? You don't have to be a genius to go to grad school, but you have to lay the foundation to be able to go to grad school, and you got to stay with some tough work long enough. But keep in mind that they picked you because they know you have what it takes, right? That's why they picked you. Use that as a confidence booster, and they're supposed to challenge you, but also support you, and that's what you're looking for in a program. And then once you're there, start your career planning on arrival. And that'll do us for today. You're welcome to stay around and ask questions if you want to, but I don't want to make anybody stay longer than they have already. I appreciate it. I'll get in this list later, and y'all have a wonderful day. If you want to talk, stay around. So you don't have to map your undergraduate research experience directly onto what you want to do for graduate. Having any research experience at all as an undergraduate is unusual and cool. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm going to be a neuroscientist, therefore I have to work in neuroscience as an undergrad. Any lab will give you basic research experience, and that's going to be appreciated by any potential graduate faculty in the future. But if you go, hey, well, that lab's full, this is the next closest thing to my natural interest, check into that lab. But like I said, don't shotgun them and like write everybody and say, hey, I'm totally interested in everybody's stuff, because that, and especially don't do that in one email where everybody sees that everybody else got CC'd, because they'll just go, well, good luck. Right? I hope you find somebody that will respond to that. But most people, when they need somebody, are going to put it out on Psych Talk. And if they don't put it out on Psych Talk, you're going to have to take the initiative and contact them. The idea is you're going to get into a professional school that's going to train you to be a researcher in some cases, a clinician in some cases, whatever the case may be, and you want to get some background in whatever it is you're going to do. So if you're going to go into a practice degree like PsyD or maybe an EdD in counseling, well, you're not really going to, you would still do a thesis and a dissertation, for example, but they're not going to be requiring you to collect original data or design research or do sophisticated statistical analyses. Well, then doing volunteer work, helping out, would be probably more advantageous to pitching yourself to those kind of programs. If you want to go into a PhD program that's like a research-based degree, then the more research experience you have, the better, because what you're saying is, hey, I know I like research. That's what you're doing with any background, is saying, they're going to say, well, how do you know you want to be a PhD? Do you even know what it's about? And you're like, well, yeah, I've been working in actually a research laboratory for the last 2 semesters. I've seen a doctoral student and a master's student propose and defend their thesis and dissertation. I've been working on lots of different projects, and I've been seeing how data collection occurs, the database management, statistical analyses, dissemination, research, and you'll be able to talk the talk of the researcher. You see what I'm saying? So the more you have, the better, but you don't want to divide yourself up into lots of different labs. It's better to get focused work with one faculty member for a long time rather than scattered faculty experience, because if you go to this person for 1 semester and this person for 1 semester and this person for 1 semester, they don't really know you all that well, and they're looking for dedication, longevity, commitment, the kinds of things you want them to talk about. For the exceptional student, they might go and work in 2 labs at once. So I have a couple students actually in my history where they worked really hard in my lab, but then they developed an interest in somebody else's lab, and I'm a person who's like, absolutely, have at it. Go work with somebody else, but don't divide your time such that you start doing a bad job in the previous lab. Either make a clean break from it and say, thank you for your time. I hope you would be willing to write me a letter of recommendation. I'm going to try to get some experience over here. Or I'd like to keep working in your lab as a volunteer at reduced hours because I'm going to commit more time to this lab. But you got to keep in mind that you want to do a great job no matter where you are. And so if you got a real work job or kids or family or relationships or classes or whatever, you got to work all of this into your day. So you want to be careful about it. Consistency, exactly. Consistency, that everybody knew what you were doing. In fact, you'd want some guidance. It's like, because if you do it without other people knowing, and I go, hey, so-and-so is working in my lab, and somebody goes, they're working in mine too. Somebody goes, hey, they're working in my lab too, and we didn't even know you were in the, a little bit. You'd like to think people would be above that, but the fact is we all have egos, and it's like if it's my research and I got my assistants working on my research, I want to think they're dedicated to my stuff. Now, for me personally, I don't mind people getting broad experience, but I also guide them. Yeah, I guide them and just say, be careful not to spread yourself too thin. Make sure that when you leave on good terms. Or if you stay, that you make sure you dedicate sufficient time to keep your reputation intact. And that when you take on a new laboratory, for example, that you give the same level of commitment and dedication to them so that they can say the same great things about you.
But as long as, it's not going to be detrimental to me to forge multiple
not at the not at the undergraduate level, I don't think. Now, you can't make a categorical statement that it's good or it's bad, but what you're trying to do is pitch a case that you're ready for grad school. And if you can make the case that you sought out these because they strategically made sense for you to get experience in these realms, then that's showing initiative, it's showing thoughtfulness and planning, right? If you just go from lab to lab to lab and there's no consistency and you can't unify it in terms of a theme or a rationale, then it looks like you're scattered and you don't know what you're really doing. You're just kind of like taking random shots at stuff and hoping it'll stick, which may be the case, but you don't want to convey. I'm not saying for you, but for people, literally, you don't really know what's going to, really become your passion until you try something. And so you try it, it may not stick. And you might, at the graduate level, then it has higher and higher consequences for leaving a laboratory. But it's better to leave early if it's definitely not your thing. Not you personally. No, I'm talking in greater generality here. And because this is going to happen with a lot of people. They'll go to grad school and they'll get hooked up with a mentor and they think, well, this is the stuff. And then they meet other faculty and they see other students and they see other programs of research and they go, well, that's actually more in line with what I'd like to do for a career. And at this point, you got to be really careful, really politically adept and diplomatic, and make a transition, because if you spend 4 years doing something you're not going to love, it's a lot of wasted time when you could have moved early. But when you move, it's typically a permanent move. But undergrad, you have more fluidity because there's not as many consequences. But when you're at the graduate level, when you make those moves, they better be very strategic. But you could also bridge labs, which is very cool. If you can make intradisciplinary connections, right, between different faculty members where you're helping them come together and do something unique that they wouldn't have been able to do without a good graduate student who saw how both of the purposes of these labs could be united on a project, that's something everybody could appreciate, as long as they have an orientation towards working with others well. And not everybody does. So some people are very invested in their stuff, in which case you just have to respond to that because that's the way it is for them. No? All right. Well, thank y'all for coming.